Hi guys, welcome to the third session of Respiration or the respiratory system ka chapter, and today we'll be covering the last three topics, that is transport of gases, regulation, that is neural regulation of respiration, followed by disorders of the respiratory system. So let's go. Okay, we already learned that the gases are diffused by the alveolar membrane and then they enter the blood capillaries. Now, how, in which form are these gases transported through the blood in order to reach the tissues? That's what we're going to learn under transport of gases. Now, let's start with oxygen. Oxygen is transported in mainly two forms. One is as oxyhemoglobin via the RBCs, and the second one is in a dissolved form in the plasma. So the second one is just 3% of it. Almost 3% of oxygen which is diffused across the membrane is transported via the plasma when it's already dissolved in it. But the other, that is almost 97% of it, it's transported as carbaminohemoglobin. So if you see hemoglobin molecule, I'm just going to draw a rough thing. It basically has 4 subunits and 2 of alpha chain and 2 of beta chain. Now these 4 subunits can carry 4 molecules of oxygen each. So one hemoglobin molecule will have 4 molecules of oxygen each, and you can say 100 ml of blood has about 12 to 16 gram of hemoglobin. So you can imagine the amount of oxygen that can be carried just through hemoglobin. And okay, so it binds to this hemoglobin and it's transported, and then it again unbinds to from the hemoglobin at the place where it has to get into the tissues. So how does this binding and unbinding happen, and what are the factors that affect it? The 4 main factors that affect it are partial pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion concentration or the pH, and the temperature. So how they affect is, let's take an example of the alveoli. Now alveoli mein, the partial pressure of oxygen is very high. As we read, it was about 95, and PCO2 is low, which is 40, and H plus ion concentration is also low. That means pH is high, it's more alkaline, and temperature is low. So if PO2 is high and all the others are low, then this situation kind of favors the formation of oxyhemoglobin or O2 bound to hemoglobin. So at the alveoli, all these conditions are there, and that's why the oxygen molecules, they get bound to hemoglobin. But they move through the blood, and when they reach the tissues, you know that oxygen ka partial pressure reduces in the tissues and carbon dioxide ka increases. It becomes 40-45. So in the tissues, it's completely opposite conditions. Reduced oxygen partial pressure, increased PCO2, increased H+, that is low pH or acidic conditions, and increased temperature. So these conditions are present in the tissues, due to which what happens is that oxygen which is bound to hemoglobin, present as oxyhemoglobin, it gets dissociated. Matlab oxygen hemoglobin se nikal jata hai and it moves into the tissues. Okay, and so this association and dissociation of oxygen can be depicted in this graph. This shows, the y-axis shows the percentage saturation of oxygen on hemoglobin, and x-axis shows the PO2. You just have to learn the shape of the graph, that is a sigmoid curve, and for NEET you'll also have to learn what happens when the graph moves left or right. When it moves right, the dissociation increases. So all those conditions you'll be learning for NEET. But for now, you just have to know that this is a sigmoid curve. And this is a very, they keep asking this question. Okay, so this is the curve between oxygen and hemoglobin. Also, for every 100 ml of blood, there is 5 ml of oxygen which reaches. So you can remember the proportions. Now let's move to carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, 70% is transported by bicarbonate ions. I'll be explaining what they are later. And 20 to 25% are transported as carbaminohemoglobin. Just like oxygen forms oxyhemoglobin, carbon dioxide forms carbaminohemoglobin, but only 20 to 25% of it is transported in that form. And the rest is transported as dissolved form in plasma. That's about 7%, just like oxygen. The only thing different here is the formation of bicarbonate ions. Let's first discuss carbaminohemoglobin. So just like oxygen, in the alveoli, it's just the opposite conditions. In alveoli, PCO2 is low, partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low. That is why the formation of the carbaminohemoglobin is not favored. तो क्या होता है, tissues में there is a higher pressure, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, so then carbaminohemoglobin is formed. It's transported towards the lungs. Alveoli में the partial pressure of carbon dioxide gets lower, and thus this carbon dioxide unbinds from hemoglobin. So this carbaminohemoglobin gets dissociated into hemoglobin and carbon dioxide is removed out of the body through the lungs. So that's the process with carbaminohemoglobin. Now the most important part which you have to know is bicarbonate ion transport. So bicarbonate ion transport mein it's transported in the form of HCO3 minus ions. Now how this is formed is by the presence of an enzyme known as carbonic anhydrase. So this carbonic anhydrase enzyme is present in RBCs and it's also present in plasma. So what happens is CO2 plus water in the presence of carbonic anhydrase will give you this H2CO3, and now this will dissociate into H plus HCO3 minus. And this is how it's transported in this form, bicarbonate form. And there is a huge mechanism for the formation of bicarbonate ions. There's involvement of chlorine and etc. So you'll be learning that for NEET. But for now, you just have to know that it's transported in this form, and this form is mostly formed in the tissues. So it's a reversible reaction. Just make sure that it's a reversible reaction. So what happens in the tissues is the carbon dioxide which is released from the tissues, it binds with water and it forms this bicarbonate ion and it's transported to the lungs. And in the lungs, it undergoes the same process ulta because it's a reversible process. So this forms back carbon dioxide, and from there carbon dioxide is released to the outer atmosphere. And as oxygen, about 5 ml is transported per 100 ml of blood. Similarly, carbon dioxide 4 ml is transported per 1000 ml of blood. So this is the transport of gases. Let's move on to regulation. Now the respiratory functions or the rate of breathing is controlled by various centers present in our brain. The most important one is the respiratory rhythm center. This is present in our brain stem or medulla. And respiratory rhythm center, it coordinates the rate of inspiration and expiration. It receives signals from various parts of the body. Followed by pneumotaxic center. Pneumotaxic center is present in the pons. Pons is another place in the brain. It's a structure which connects different parts of the brain. So pneumotaxic center present in the pons, and there is a chemosensitive area which is present just next to the respiratory rhythm center. So what happens is this pneumotaxic center, it actually sends in signals to the respiratory rhythm center, and this chemosensitive area also sends in signal to the respiratory rhythm center so that it can coordinate the rate of breathing. So how this chemosensitive area works is it recognizes the fall or gain of hydrogen ions and carbon dioxide. So as you know that hydrogen ions and carbon dioxide really influence the formation of the various intermediates in transport of gases. So that way breathing rate can also be controlled. So that is about the 3 main areas. Now come to receptors. So there's certain receptors in our body which are carotid artery. Carotid artery is the artery that carries blood to your brain. And aortic arch. Aortic arch is the arc of the aorta which comes from the heart, from the left ventricle. So these two places, there are certain receptors. Receptors, they sense the reduction or gain in H plus ion and carbon dioxide concentration, and they send their stimulus to the respiratory rhythm center, and which further acts upon the respiration rate. So that's just about the regulation of respiration. Let's come to disorders. Disorders, there's just 3 in NCERT, but obviously there are more. Asthma. Asthma is something you've heard way many times. You might even have people who you know who have asthma. So asthma is due to the inflammation of bronchioles and bronchi. Remember I told you trachea gets divided into bronchioles and bronchi and various parts, primary bronchiole, tertiary bronchiole. Similarly, when they get inflamed, there is difficulty in breathing, and that thing is called as asthma. The second one is emphysema. Emphysema is due to the proliferation of the alveolar wall. Matlab, the alveolar walls are damaged. So when alveolar walls get damaged, it automatically reduces the surface area of alveoli. You know that alveoli are present to increase surface area for diffusion of gases, right? So in that way, emphysema ki wajah se, the alveolar wall gets damaged, and it's mostly caused due to cigarette smoking, and that's why they say that it's harmful for your lungs. And the last one is occupational respiratory disorders. You know, certain daily wage workers who work in mint grinding factories, or where a lot of smoke, dust and particulate matter are produced. So when these enter the body system, they kind of weaken the defense. Our body's defense cannot act upon them as much as it does before. So it weakens the defense system, and that causes fibrosis and so there are various forms of occupational respiratory disorder, and they've just given the general term for this. Fibrosis is the proliferation of fibrous matter, or the almost fluid becoming accumulated in the lungs, etc. So that's about the disorders. We are officially done with respiration chapter, and we'll be starting with body fluids and circulation in the next chapter. That's the next chapter. I'll just give you a recap of what this chapter has been about. We started with the respiratory system as a whole, the anatomy. We started with what are the different respiratory organs in different organisms. We completed the anatomy of the respiratory system, starting from the nostrils till the terminal alveoli wall. And then we also read about the mechanism of breathing, that is creation of pressure and volume changes so that air is taken in and air is given out. And then we also talked about how exchange of gases takes place, the three membranes involved, and the partial pressure, the heart being involved in it, the pumping of blood, etc. Then we finally talked about transport of gases, the respiratory regulation, and the disorders. So I hope you all revised this chapter. It's very easy. Human physiology is very easy. If you want me to repeat anything, or if you have any doubts, then please let me know. Thank you so much for watching.